Next, we're going to have Katie Smith from DNCR talk about accessibility, accessible by design, web governance that works for everyone.
Thank you all. Thank you so much while we all sit here and photosynthesize in the sun. I think we all feel good to get out of the office. So I'm Katie Smith, Assistant Marketing Director at the North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. And I just want to go ahead and say thank you to the Digital Commons team for putting this together. I've worked with them for almost a decade now on a lot of different projects. And so I just want to say that I'm really excited that they picked this topic this year. One, because someone asked the question earlier, how do we get people to start understanding this? And as you talk about it, and you talk about it all the time, and you bring it up all the time, and you do exactly what we're doing today. So I want to thank y'all for being here today and being open to this conversation and engaging with it. And so today I'm going to talk a little about governance. Before I get started though, I want to share a little anecdotal story. In 2021, my ex-husband had a stroke at the age of 48. Now, nothing caused this stroke that we know of, no trauma. Basically, when we met with the doctor, she said, sometimes arteries just break and we don't know why. And the reason I bring this up is he was very healthy, had no medical issues, but he became disabled overnight. And anyone in this room could become disabled. His entire life changed. He learned to walk again, he learned to talk, and he's doing great now. He was unfortunately not able to go back to work, but helping him through this process, because we still have a great relationship, I realized how important accessibility is, especially if it comes to you overnight, right? Like, to learn to live in a world that basically has not been built for you is very difficult. And even though accessibility had always been something that was important to me, I realized in that moment how very important it is as us, civil servants and our agencies, to make sure that we are able to accommodate that. Now, one of the things that I'm going to talk a little bit about, but I want to share for why this is so important, is that we have to be the ones that are very vocal about this. A couple years ago, we were meeting with a vendor about a website. I started looking through it and I said, hey, there's serious issues with the color contrast on this website. And I made my concerns known. I said, this is not even passing basic accessibility guidelines. And I remember he said, but that's the brand colors. We want it to match the brand colors. And I wanted to be like, honey, I'm going to touch your arm while I tell you this. A pretty website is not a civil right. Accessibility is. That is what our job is to do, because that is something that's important. And the truth is we can get sued over it. And when people ask you, you start talking about lawsuits, it gets real serious real quick. Now, the other reason is we should do it because it's the right thing to do, right? And so how do we get there? And we get there through governance. So web governance is the structure that defines how websites are managed. It gives teams clear rules. It defines responsibilities, repeatable workflows, and the tools needed to monitor accessibility. When these pieces are in place, accessibility becomes intentional instead of reactive, and that's what we need to get to. Now, where does DNCR stand today? Every agency sits somewhere on what we call a maturity scale. Some are just getting started, some are at the very beginning, others have more coordinated process. Right now, DNCR is kind of in the define stage, where we have a clear direction, documented expectations, and a structure that supports consistency. So I've kind of put this model together. This is a mix of kind of some accessibility maturity models, but also where I see us in state government. So initial is where some of y'all might be right now. Accessibility is handled reactively and inconsistently. You don't know you have a problem till literally you get sued and legal says we have a problem, right? You don't want to be in that place. Developing, this is basic standards and tools in place, but inconsistent adoption. Someone mentioned that earlier. Not everybody's doing the same thing. Defined as there's a governance plan with roles, processes, and shared expectations, but I'll be honest, we still have issues, right? And we'll talk about why we have those issues. Managed is regular monitoring, reporting, training, and then optimized accessibility built into planning, procurement, and culture. Now, where do we stand today? We're kind of in the defined stage, right? Our digital strategy is really the accessibility. So I will say this, about 3 years ago, I met with our CIO, Amanda Richardson, and I said, we have a really big problem. Nobody knows what they're supposed to be doing digital-wise. It was all over the place. In 2015, our agency merged between nature and culture. We have over 100 sites, physical locations, dozens of websites, some on digital commons, some building their own custom websites. And there was literally no plan. And when the pandemic hit, we were in a serious pickle, y'all. We had laptops that didn't even have webcams, right? It was panic mode. And that's when I realized no one had really put together an actual digital strategy for our agency. So the CIO and I worked together, and one of the things that's in our digital strategy is accessibility is built into every digital part of what we do, okay? And so on this screen, you see a picture of a screenshot with a picture of someone pointing at a laptop, and it talks about our digital strategy. Now, from there, we built internal workflows, publishing expectations, and review processes that made accessibility part of our daily operations, and we strengthened cross-team collaboration between IT, marketing, and communications. And that's how we started having a conversation of how do we wrap this in to everything we're doing. So our digital strategy provided the direction, and our governance process operationalized it. Now, I think we all know these digital ecosystems are complex, to say the least, in state government. Large number of content editors and site owners, frequent turnover and shifting roles, competing priorities and limiting time, varying levels of accessibility, knowledge, complex multi-site environments. This complexity makes accessibility difficult without a strong governance process. And this has been a really big issue for us because we have, unfortunately, some high turnover in some areas. And so we'll get a web manager trained, then that person leaves, and another person comes in, and no one knows how this content got on the website. They don't know why the content's there. So there's been a lot of conversations happening back and forth, and a lot of this is just really keeping those communication lines open. Now, this is where governance helps. It gives everyone a shared framework. It defines roles and responsibilities, it creates guardrails, and keeps accessibility consistent even when staff change. So when we're talking about governance and how that supports accessibility, we're talking about a clear shared framework. Everybody knows what is that. You probably have heard roadmap a lot today. That's because roadmaps are very, very important. People need guidance. If you just say make it accessible, they literally are going to look at you like, what are you talking about? Because they really don't know what that means. So you have to have a clear roadmap. Define roles, responsibilities, and accountability. When someone becomes a web manager, just as if they become a social media manager or whatever else, I say these are your responsibilities. You have taken on this role. This is what the expectations are. Those guardrails keep accessibility on track across divisions and consistent expectations even when staff change. It shows agencies are committed to accessible digital services because governance connects people, processes, and technology under one shared standard, right? That's one of the biggest things is sometimes there's not clear expectations, people aren't sure of the goal, and so we want to make sure that that's rooted in everything we do, our digital strategy, our strategic plan, our procurement. Accessibility is always part of that. Now, what does governance mean in practice? Well, who is responsible for accessibility at each stage? What standards must all sites follow? How new content redesigns and migrations are approved, and how accessibility is monitored and reported, and how issues are prioritized and fixed. This puts structure around every part of the web lifecycle. What I find a lot of times when I meet with folks is they're not even thinking that far ahead. They're just thinking, we need to get a website. We need to get a website up. And they're not thinking about even what that content is. They're just like, we got to get something up for people to look at and go to. And so we want to make sure that we have this governance and process to be able to refer back to and go, this is how we do this. So how do we do it at DNCR? The first thing is division web managers have with clear authority. So a lot of times we'll have folks who want to do something to their website and they'll say, well, my web manager said that I couldn't do this. And I'll say, well, that's correct. You can't. And the web manager is the person you have to refer to because they have the training, the knowledge, and the understanding, right? We also had a strong partnership or continue to have a strong partnership with our CIO. So one of the things that we started doing is working very closely with them on RFQs. Where we saw a lot of breakdown is that no one from marketing communications was part of any website vendor RFQs, which led to literal websites being built, launched, that did not meet accessibility. And it was a huge issue because no one was at the table to say, hey, here are all the things we've learned. I have went through dozens of new website builds, migrations, and I can tell you probably right now 10 things that I see as issues all the time. No one asked those questions, right? So part of this new process that we built was anytime any kind of web tool, website came to our CIO to put out for a vendor, she was like, can you please review this and let me know if there's anything we're missing? And there were things that were missing, things that should have been assessed, things that should be included. We also put me down as a person for the vendor to talk to. So recently, one of our sites is getting a new museum. They picked the vendors through the whole RFQ procurement process, and they interviewed me, and they asked me questions, and they said, you've brought up a lot of points that up to this point no one has mentioned. And that's because my insight is so broad. I've seen all different types of websites with different use cases that accessibility can really be different depending on who your audience is, right? And so it was really important that we be part of that process. And then one of the things, and those who are in this meeting know, I talk about accessibility in every one of our meetings. We have monthly marketing communications meetings. Accessibility is always brought up because people will forget about it. They won't think about it. It's not always at the forefront of the conversation. And so anytime they're talking about a new marketing campaign, a new website, anything with communication, a form, a survey tool, I'm like, accessibility, accessibility. If I see something, we have a group chat, I pop in the chat and say, hey, I noticed a lot of y'all are using Unicode to do this. Please don't do this. It's not accessible. And so these are the types of things that you just have to keep having a conversation. And people's behaviors have changed. We have gotten so much better. Now we add alt text to things. People are doing so much better the way that they create graphics and what they put on their website. And that's because we always have it be part of the conversation. The other thing that we started doing is what we call a content first process. So when someone comes to us and says, I want to build a new landing page or a new website, or I need to migrate a website, I always ask them these questions first. What content users need? So like what are the things that they're going to be accessing? Who is the audience? How the information should be structured? And what task people want to complete? And what format best communicates the information? So you decide the content before you decide anything. And that is so important in what we do. And so I'm going to give you a great kind of case study and example of this. So we have one of our divisions, the Historic Preservation Office. They originally had their own website years ago. It was very, very outdated. I'm pretty sure it was built on like Macromedia Dreamweaver. I mean, nobody could update it anymore. It was a mess. And so we said, look, we're not sure what we're going to do now. We're going to migrate it into the DNCR website and we'll reassess. Well, it actually ended up being a great thing. Because it got migrated into the DNCR website, I was immediately able to see there was some serious issues with the content. First of all, everything was presented in PDFs, everything. They had 5,000 PDFs. It was wild. Part of this was because a lot of the work they do involves a lot of surveys, reports, but a lot of this content really shouldn't have been PDFs. They also had the highest, I mean, when I say our inbox every day was filled with questions like, how do I get my house on a national register? How do I do this? How do I do that? I can't find this. And so I started realizing pretty quickly, this process of how they were sharing information with the public was not working for anyone, right? And so when they decided we're going to pull that content out of our website and build their own website, the first thing I did was I sat down with them and I said, all right, real talk. We got to talk about these PDFs. We got to talk about how this information is presented. A lot of this written in so much jargon, nothing's bulleted, and I was really nice about it, y'all. But I was like, hey, this is why. And I showed them evidence. And that's really important when you go to people like this. You can't just say, hey, this needs to be accessible, or you need to do this. I said, look, I'm going to show you, and I literally put a deck together. And I presented not to the whole team, but each division, because each division's constituents were very different. What they needed, their audiences were very different. And I said, here's your web analytics. Here is the drop-off rates. Here is the hundreds of emails we've gotten to our contact us where people can't find information, and this is what I propose. And so we sat down and I said, this is what we're gonna do. Let's figure out what things have to stay reports, what things can become HTML, and would you be open to me helping rewrite some of this content so that it is more manageable to consume, not just straight 8 paragraphs of text. And they were very open about it and very appreciative. But they didn't realize it was a problem. They really didn't realize it was a problem. And so one of the things we did for the new website is the first thing we did is we went through and said, can we convert some of these things, like how do I put an application in for my house to be part of the National Register? That literally was just a PDF. There was no website page for this. You had to literally open the PDF, download it, or just zoom in on it to read it. So we converted that to a web page. We looked through what were the top 5 things that people asked the most questions about. We converted all of that to HTML. And then the other thing we did was I said, there has to be consistency across your website. So let's make sure, one, that all of this stuff is accessible, but also if they go to environmental review or they go to National Registry, the format is similar so everybody knows what to expect when they get to those pages, because that was a big issue. The landing pages they had were so out of it, and you couldn't tell where to find things. So we created a structured template, and I said, this is the template we're going to use for each of the units in HPO. So we have a carousel, we have 5 call to actions that are the main questions people are asking, we have a quick links with resources, and then we have something at the bottom that they want to spotlight, a map system, whatever. And we realized, and I'm not joking, the contact us went down almost 70%. They went from getting literally dozens of emails a day to maybe 1 or 2 of not being able to find stuff. And that was because PDFs didn't work, a lot of the stuff wasn't accessible, and it wasn't just not accessible to people who needed accessibility things, it was inaccessible to anyone. I personally would get so frustrated when I was trying to find stuff on their website. I did learn a lot about hand-hewn nails, though. I will say I know a lot more about historic preservation than I thought, because I had to comb through all of that content. And I'll say this takes time. It takes time, it takes effort, it's understanding the content. So I set up a system of meeting with them. We went through the process. I basically said, hey, here's some prompts. Let's see if we can find this information easily. And it worked out, and they have a great website now. And it takes work, and they're continuing to work, and we got to do all the PDF remediation. But this is a great example of how part of our governance process now is when we meet with folks, but when they request a website, it goes to me first, and then I have a conversation with them. We figure out what their needs are, and then we say, how can we take the existing content or new content and make it accessible? And we train them on that. I have trainings with them and say, here's what you need to do once you become web manager. Now, when we talk about governance, that covers across a lot of things, not just websites. So that includes web applications, PDFs, forms and workflows, media, social content, and third-party platforms. And that's one thing to think about with this Title II ADA is that it's not just websites. This covers social media. It covers a lot of the digital things that we present to the public. Now, when you start thinking about your governance, you're going to have a roadmap, and so you want to make sure that it's a plan that can be long-term. So you want to set clear milestones, such as policy updates. If you want to have your own template styles within your website, website reviews, quarterly reviews, and specific priorities and resource needs. So again, every month at our marketing communications, I say, hey, this is our accessibility thing of the month. This is what everybody needs to focus on. Here's your Dubbot report. We need to fix those broken links. This is an issue. We got to fix this. And I'm just very transparent and open about it. So you want to make sure that you have some type of either policy adoption, digital strategy, something to work from that everybody unifies around. You want to have template and component updates. So again, kind of have a structure, because it can get overwhelming when you go in digital commons and you're like, should this be a band? Should this be this? Should be that? But what you want is consistency across your website so that they know when they go to these site pages, this is how things are going to be structured. PDF remediation goals, a new site review process, and quarterly reporting. You also want to have a realistic roadmap. So you want timelines of how you're going to do these things. You want to prioritize what's the most important, and then obviously resource planning. And again, I will say this wasn't an easy process for us. It took years, and it took a lot of conversations and understanding about what does this look like for our agency. You also want to have a central reporting framework. So for us, we do monthly reports. My director shares that at the leadership meetings. We continue to communicate with kind of what I would call our communities of practice within our agency and make sure that everybody's on the same page of what are the expectations. And so that I think has been the biggest thing, is also people who've had learned experiences sharing like, hey, this is how we learned from this situation we recently had, for example. And then you want to obviously monitor it. So we have scheduled audits. So again, I usually run audits quarterly. I let folks know where they are. I work with their web managers, or in some cases they even send it to their vendor, their vendor reaches out to me directly and says, what do we need to fix? We do frequent check-ins. We want to make sure this is habit building, so making sure that everybody, this is just part of what we do when we are putting information together. And then consistent onboarding for content creators and managers. So for us, the goal is stability and continuity and not one-time fixes. That's the thing we got to get away from. So we created clear guidelines. So simple, clear standards, example of accessible content. What I learned a lot of is not 8 pages of paragraph, do this, not that. That's what people do say. What do you need me to do? What do you need me not to do? So the pre-built components, so that again, with our HPO, figuring out what do each of these divisional landing pages look like, how do we streamline this, and then shared language for talking about accessibility. So this turned it into a daily practice for us. So how did we do this? Well, it started with building out our SharePoint. So we built what we call our digital media guide. Everyone that's onboarded accesses this on our intranet. They book a session with me. I walk them through it. This has our website and social media basics, policies, resources. We talk through what is the expectations as a social media manager, a web manager, what you're going to be expected to do. And then we also have a digital accessibility section as part of that people can access, that has resources, updates on Title II, new things. I post all the stuff that DIT sends us there, as well as any webinars or trainings that we have. And so this has been a great tool to send folks. So when they come on, I send them a welcome email that has links to everything. They book a session with me. We talk for about 30 minutes to an hour. We walk through all of the basic things. And then I'm like, hey, I'm here. If you run into issues, message me. So for us, all our web projects start with a content and audience review. Then we talk about accessibility and design planning. Then we go to drafting and structural reviews. And then we do a governance accessibility review. So who's going to be responsible for stuff on your website? We publish it, and then we monitor it, okay? So this is an important workflow that we established that has helped us kind of maintain that roadmap that we talked about. So it keeps it embedded in everything that we do. So lessons learned and what comes next. Accessibility improves when built into the design process. So that, again, is making sure that we are explaining to folks, like, why is this important and why do we want to maintain these standards? Governance unifies decentralized teams, simple, clear expectations, and tools and training empower staff at every level. So for us, we're going to continue to work more on our reporting. We want to create more of a dashboard. We actually submitted something to the AI Accelerator that's going to help us do this. So we are going to try to look at how we can streamline this. Expanded guidance on content structure and readability. One of the biggest things we've run into is, as discussed, I actually come from the museum world, and one of the things we learn when you're writing exhibits, most people read at a 5th grade level. So if you're writing something on a website, even though you might have jargon, you really have to break it down. And so that's something that we're struggling with a lot of our sites that are more, I think, academic leaning, is when do we use these types of language. So really working with folks on that. And then continued improvement through collaboration and monitoring. So how do y'all get started? First is identify your website users and define their responsibilities. One of the things I have to do regularly is clean up our website. Who has access to what is their section they're responsible for, following up with them, saying, hey, I noticed this hasn't been updated in a while. Do you want to talk about it? Or maybe some things that we can improve on it. Create a shared accessibility hub. So I showed you how we built that on our SharePoint. Add accessibility checks to publishing workflows, just making sure that everyone is going through a checklist of, hey, here are all the things we need before our landing page gets launched. Use Dubbot. Dubbot's great. I'll get in there. Honestly, sometimes when I just need something monotonous to do, I just fix broken links, so I don't have to really think. You know, been in a meetings for hours. It's a great little visual melatonin. Discuss accessibility monthly to build habits and awareness. Bring it up all the time. Talk about it all the time. Talk about things you saw that you thought were great, new tools, reminders, you know. It's important that it be part of the conversation. So thank you all so much for your time today.